What was your reaction to the results of the trial or the disposition of the case in John's murder?
Incensed that a fine young man like John can simply be erased and nothing seems to happen. Incensed is the word. Really a travesty of justice, the whole thing.
As far as charging accomplices, I can tell you that if we had identification of anyone else involved, there would be charges and there would be a prosecution.
On Channel 17 Reports this week, we'll examine the controversial murder of a heavyweight. Described by many as a gentle giant, 22-year-old John Turner was brutally beaten to death by members of Hamilton, Ontario's notorious Parkdale gang following a weightlifting competition at Hamilton Place on August 16, 1980. Only one gang member was charged with murder and sentenced on a reduced plea of manslaughter, is subject for parole next year. Frustrated family members and friends of Turner question the efforts made by the Hamilton police and attorneys for the Crown. For them, it is a question of justice. John Vernon Turner, the only son of Mervyn and Jacqueline Turner, grew up in the bucolic setting of Stouffville, some 40 miles north of Toronto. His was a typical life of sports and school and later helping his father in construction and working in a fish hatchery. He married his grammar school sweetheart, the only girl he ever dated. What brought him to Hamilton on the last day of his life was a wedding present from his best friend, Armand Schaff, also a bodybuilder. The two young couples enjoying the weightlifting competition at Hamilton Place never dreamed they would be involved in a senseless killing in the strange city. What remains is bitterness, grief, and a lack of faith in the justice system by those close to John Turner, and the apparent equal frustration of law enforcement officials. But in Canada and in the United States, justice and the law sometimes seem to be at cross purposes to those who have suffered loss.
Very well liked by everybody, and I don't think he had a bad friend.
Any problems ever?
Never had any problems, no. Always do what you told him, and you know, he's good at school, and he's always in sports.
He was very easygoing. He would never impose on anyone. He was always in a good mood, and he was just nice to have around. And he used to say he liked my company too, because I never put pressure on him. I didn't either. We just got along very nicely. My best friend, really, my best man friend. And of course he loved sports and was really devoted to hockey when he was in it, and then he became too old to play anymore. And he went into the weightlifting, and he was really, you know, every day's food had to be proper, and his training had to be proper. In fact, he would hitchhike to Vic Tanny's to get in his training. That's how devoted he was.
How long did you know John, and how long were you married?
I knew him for about 10 years, and we went together for about 7. And we were married for 3 months.
How was his temperament in all those years?
Terrific.
They
Really
sound
mild-mannered and very polite.
Everybody we talked to said that. And does anybody ever see him where he would be violent or upset or anything?
Never.
That's one thing I'm grateful for, that at least they had each other for that time. And he did have a nice wedding, and he did have some of the joys, you know, before it happened. And he did have a wonderful childhood. He really loved our house and the area, and he just loved the woods, to walk in the woods, and he swam in the pond every day, come home from work and just dive off that diving board, and out he'd go, swim across and back, and just loved it. So those are the things to be grateful for. You know, that he did enjoy his life up to that point. He really did.
This was John Turner's school in Stouffville, where he became interested in bodybuilding and physical fitness, and where his ability and character will be remembered. What did they do here in the school in memory of John?
They contribute a trophy in his name, which is given to the best male athlete every year.
And his all-around nature, how would you describe it?
Oh, very good, jovial, very, as I say, very soft-spoken, very polite.
Never pushed his way around because of his...
Not that I know of, no, no, definitely not.
First time I knew him, John was always a gentle giant. Very, very quiet, very well-mannered, and I think really the students always looked up to John.
Anybody ever provoke him?
If you saw John, you weren't too likely to try to provoke John, but I can remember incidents when other people might have lost their cool, but John never did. I can well remember he was in grade 10, when he was in grade 10, and one of our teachers, a little bit inexperienced, sort of blew up at a bunch of the boys, and he sort of yelled at John and said, "What's your name?" And John said, "JT, sir, John Turner," and that's one of the boys. He always spoke very, very quietly. I think it was impossible to provoke John Turner. He was just that type of person.
What was your reaction to the results of the trial or the disposition of the case in John's murder?
Incensed that a fine young man like John can simply be erased and nothing seems to happen. Incensed is the word. Really a travesty of justice, the whole thing.
Immediately after the attack on Turner, police issued a nationwide assault warrant for the arrest of George McIntyre, a member of the Parkdale gang. Following Turner's death, it became a warrant for second-degree murder. McIntyre, whose arrest record shows 13 criminal charges since 1974, surrendered to authorities 3 months after the murder. McIntyre never went to trial. He was allowed to plead guilty to the lesser count of manslaughter, and last September began serving a 3-year term in Millhaven Maximum Security Prison outside of Kingston, Ontario. If he remains on good behavior, McIntyre can walk out of those prison gates a free man next year. What was the mood the day the 4 of you went to Hamilton Place for the weightlifting competition?
It was happy. We were all excited. And
almost immediately after the decision was made, we proceeded to the washrooms. And McIntyre was pacing up and down the side of the doors. You know, maybe like a lion in a cage, maybe. Really seemed to be upset about something, shaking his head and saying, "No, no, no."
His man lost.
Yes, yes. And we walked into the washroom. There was one other, as far as I can recall, I'm quite sure there's one other person in the washroom. It was either me and or John who said, and I can't remember up to this day who said it. Something like, "This guy out there, he's a real idiot." You know, because he definitely made, you could say, an ass of himself on stage.
He did moon on stage.
Yes, yes, yes. So you know, one of us commented about it, and I still don't know who. And when we then left the washroom, well, this man that was in the washroom with us before, left before us. We then came out. This McIntyre came up to us, both of us, by himself at this time, raising his fists and saying, "If you got something to say to me, say it now." And then I thought, God, this guy must be crazy to want to start a fight with us too. Like I guess he weighed about 150 pounds. Each one of us at the time, I don't weigh that much anymore, but weighed in the area of 245. Well, while he was making the comment, he raised his fists, and John was in front of me. I was just behind John. Naturally, John hit him, but McIntyre tried to hit John first. like by raising his fists. If you raise your fists, you know, you're definitely going to hit someone.
So then what happened?
Well, a fight broke out. I tried to intervene, but I did never get a chance to intervene between the two, because as soon as I got halfway in between them, I got hit in the head several times. And I turned around. It's hard to say how many men were there. I would say in the area of a dozen to 15, maybe more.
What can you tell me happened when you and Armin's friend Sue came out of the washroom? But were you aware that something had happened?
Oh, yes.
I mean, before you came out, did you hear any commotion?
Yeah, there was a little girl that came into the washroom and said there was a big fight outside. I walked out. It was bad. Yeah. Susan ran up to Armin and tried to get one of the guys off, and he threw her to the ground. And I went over to see she was all right and saw John lying on the ground.
Was anybody around him at the time?
Oh, yeah.
But
Just standing watching.
But the attack had been more or less over?
Over, yeah.
People scatter, the perpetrators?
Yeah, the police were there by the time I got out. Or by the time I saw John. I don't know if they were there before.
Did you have any help?
Oh no, there was numerous bystanders. There was about, I would say, just as many bystanders, male and female. Again, ironically, a female tried to jump in between me and one of the attackers, including my girlfriend. They were both thrown aside, and the beating just proceeded until it finally went down.
How long did this take?
It's hard to say. It took a very long time. To me, it seemed like it took 10 minutes, 5 minutes. But we didn't know what hit us. Like when I turned around, I got hit so bad that...
Immediately upon that fight starting, a group of individuals, as yet unidentified, jumped into the fracas, and the result of that was that Mr. Turner met his death. I can tell you that in this case, the matter was tried in September of 1981. The accused decided on his own, through his counsel, to approach me with a guilty plea to manslaughter. Having regard to the evidence that I had and the burden that was on me to prove my case beyond a reasonable doubt, I felt that to accept this was a reasonable decision. I made no agreement with defense counsel as regards sentence or any penalty, nor did I make any agreement with the judge. My feeling was that I should ask for a substantial period of incarceration in a federal penitentiary, and I did so.
When did you first see the victim, John Turner?
The body was brought to the mortuary here at Hamilton General Hospital on the 18th of August 1980, and we commenced our post-mortem examination in the early afternoon of that day.
And what were the findings of your autopsy?
Well, he had a number of injuries to his face and head, bruises and lacerations, but the principal injury was an injury to the back of the neck. There was very extensive bruising of the tissues of the back of the neck, which extended down to the blood vessels around the spine. And one of these blood vessels at the top of the spine was ruptured, and this had caused a massive hemorrhage around the base of the brain. It was this hemorrhage which actually caused his death.
Are you satisfied with the police investigation in this case?
I don't think the police have really done what they could have. I think they could have all these guys if they really wanted to.
You think they could have done more?
I think they could have charged them all if they really went after them.
I've talked to the superintendent of the Criminal Investigation Division as well as the Crown Attorney, and they indicate to me that they just couldn't get enough concrete evidence to make the case stand up in court on murder second, and they said that at least by a plea bargain they knew they could put this chap away for 4 years. What do you think of that?
Well, naturally, I'm not satisfied with it. Why would they sentence somebody to three or 4 years when he won't tell who his accomplices are? I think somebody like that should get the maximum.
As I felt in the Turner matter that the case was not strong at all, especially as it related to a charge of murder, a charge that the police laid. I felt that the best possible result in that case would have been a conviction for manslaughter, and certainly if we'd gone to trial, that wasn't assured. The burden of proof is something I have to assess, and the burden of proof in Canada, I expect it's similar in the United States, is beyond a reasonable doubt. I had to prove Mr. McIntyre guilty of murder beyond a reasonable doubt, and I did not feel that I could do that.
Well, Mr. Carr told me when he first talked to me that it would last about 2 weeks, and they would have all the witnesses up on the stand and talk to, and just like a regular case, I guess. And then the day of the trial, he took me up to his office and said, we don't have enough evidence. We can't get him for anything else except starting a fight. We can't arrest any of the other guys that were involved because no one will come forward. And then Mr. Ryan said,
This is the police
officer,
chief.
yeah, the detective, I guess, said that I have to live in Hamilton and my family has to live in Hamilton, and we like this city. So, in other words, to me they were saying that if we do anything about this gang, then our families are going to get involved, and we don't want them involved.
Now, the family feels that it certainly isn't logical for a man of Mr. McIntyre's size to approach Mr. Turner and Mr. Schaaf, who are each one of them is twice the size of this little man, and try to engage him in a fight, and all of a sudden, when the fight starts, some 10 to 20 other persons that allegedly were involved, supposedly from the same Parkdale gang.
They may or may not be from the same Parkdale gang. We're not sure of that because we don't know who they are. To answer that question, I think you have to look at the type of individual we're dealing with Mr. McIntyre. Mr. McIntyre, it is my understanding, fancied himself a tough guy and a street fighter. And I have no hesitation in saying that when he became involved in this fight, no matter what his size relative to the other two individuals, he felt he could handle himself quite capably. I have no doubt of that.
Of course, Mr. McIntyre was there to, I imagine, along with many others from the Parkdale gang, to witness the contest with one of their own.
That's correct.
So there's no doubt about it that there were a lot of members of the Parkdale gang there to cheer on their Mike Watson, I believe it was.
Persons that the police in the past have associated with as members of the Parkdale gang were in attendance. There's no question of that.
I think the bruising and the injuries to the face and neck could have been caused by one person, but Mr. Turner was an extremely well-developed muscular man, and I would have thought he must have been restrained in some way at the time the injuries were inflicted. And I suppose that might suggest that there was another person or persons involved.
Now, witnesses have said that a bench press was involved in the attack on your son. Did the Crown pursue this?
Not that I know of. This was the Crown's, one of the things the Crown was going to pursue when I spoke to Mr. Carr. But one of the defense witnesses seen somebody grab the bench press, but they didn't see what he did with it. In other words, they didn't want to see what he did with it because that was a witness for the defense. The doctor said that he was kicked in the head so many times and he had to be hit with a heavy object that the brain damage was so extensive, the doctor had never seen anything like it before in his life. Or practice, I should say. Now, when it comes to trial, the defense lawyer said he could have been kicked in the head by a running shoe, not a running boot, But in other words, he was kicked so many times for a crown and a judge and a defense lawyer to come up with that, you know, that's just a lie.
Did you see anyone kick John or choke him?
No. The only thing I really saw was fists and boots flying at my head, and there's not too much I could see at all. It was like the fight ended up about 15 yards apart.
This was a massive head injury. Could it be determined as a massive brain injury as well?
Well, it was principally a neck injury with the hemorrhage extending into the head around the brain. There really was not any immediate brain bruising as a result of the head injuries. So that the cause of death was principally related to an injury to the back of the neck.
It's been alluded to that a running shoe could have caused these massive injuries. Could it have been something heavier?
The man was extremely muscular, he was very well developed, and the injury was quite severe, and I would have thought it was more likely to have been caused by something much heavier. Nevertheless, a well-aimed soft shoe could certainly cause quite serious injury.
But it could have been something heavier, like a bench press,
certainly.
Something of that nature.
It could have been, yes.
Was there any evidence of strangulation?
No, there was no evidence of strangulation, and I can say that quite categorically.
The doctor did indicate that to cause such an injury, a severe blow must have been delivered. But at the same time, he would indicate that this blow could be delivered by almost anything, including a running shoe.
What about a bench press?
That's possible.
Nobody came forward to say that they saw anybody wielding a bench press?
No, there was evidence that I had that at one point, one of the attackers reached for a bench press and passed it into the fray. What use was made of it, what happened to Turner as a result of this occurring, I don't know, and no witness was able to assist me.
Did you ask to see mug shots of members of this Parkdale gang?
Well, at the time, when I was asked to give my statement, it was immediately after the fight. I was very badly, severely beaten up. I was not admitted to the hospital before that. At the time, I trusted the police. I thought, you know, they knew what they were doing. But when I thought about it later, I was wondering about it. And the investigation at first, the first few months, as you well know, proved very unsuccessful. I mean, the only reason why they got McIntyre into custody was because the man turned himself in. He'd probably still be out in the streets right now.
To my knowledge, all witnesses that we could reasonably expect that saw who was involved in this particular incident were shown pictures of known associates of McIntyre and known associates of the Parkdale gang.
Anybody eyeballed as being there?
No identification whatsoever, and I can point out that the only reason, in my view, that we had identification of Mr. McIntyre was for two reasons. Firstly, that he bared his rear end on stage. People have a habit of noticing such things. And secondly, he was pacing angrily in the corridor by himself and drew attention to himself that way.
Well, I think that the whole, the police force and the Crown handled the thing very shoddily. I think it should have been, the trial should have been held in Toronto, like they said it was going to be.
Did you ask for a change of venue?
Well, I talked to the police, and they said that the trial was going to be held in Toronto, and so the witnesses wouldn't be afraid of these characters.
We have had statements made that from certain witnesses that they saw this and they saw that, and yet when I saw a release from your Attorney General, it's just the opposite, that, oh no, I just didn't see that. I can't say for sure. Are these witnesses in fear? Do you feel they may have been intimidated?
I do not feel that at all. On the contrary, these witnesses are independent people that come from many parts of Ontario, as a matter of fact, from Windsor, from Brampton, from Toronto. These witnesses attended the bodybuilding championships, either to watch or to sell merchandise, and in attempting to identify Mr. McIntyre and others that were involved in the assault on Mr. Turner, they were doing the best they could It happened very quickly. There were a great number of people involved, people that they had not seen or heard of before that time, and they honestly were not able to identify anyone.
Efforts to interview Hamilton police about John Turner's murder led us to Superintendent George Fridd. Though he declined an on-camera interview, he openly answered all of our questions. His findings bear out the Crown's contention that based on the evidence, there was no alternative to accepting McIntyre's plea to the lesser charge of manslaughter. Superintendent Fridd also said that given additional evidence or witnesses, there would be further arrests in the Turner murder. Do you plan any kind of legal action at all against the city of Hamilton or Hamilton Place over this tragedy?
Yeah, I plan to sue Hamilton Place.
How much?
For $5 million.
It's going to be in the works, is that it?
It is right now, yeah.
What kind of frustrations have you been experiencing in this tragedy?
Well, it's been rage all along, you know. That, well, the time that you put into raising a child, and the love, and just to have it wasted like that, and his life wasted. So it's been rage and frustration, and then the awful fear that the killer wouldn't be found guilty, and then finally he was found guilty, and now it's why isn't more of the gang in jail? So there's that frustration now.
What needs to be done to put your mind to rest, if that's at all possible?
Well, that they're all caught and hung. That's it. Makes me sick that they can walk around and, you know, do the same thing to someone else.
You don't feel justice was done, do you?
Oh, no. They've done this before. Gotten away with it.
I don't think anything will ever put my mind to rest over the tragedy. I've stopped bodybuilding. Me and John were going to be competitive bodybuilders. I tried to start bodybuilding again during the past year, but things come back to my mind when I pick up a weight, and it's very, very hard for me to do it now. And I don't think, like, I still had nightmares months after that.
Is this case closed?
Absolutely not. I can assure you that any leads that the police find will be followed up upon, and if any of the other individuals involved in this assault are found, they will be prosecuted.